we move forward to the next panel discussion, which is a panel on data-led approach to India's agriculture economy. And I welcome Abhinandan Sekhri. Abhinandan will be the moderator for this panel. He is the co-founder of Newslaundry, India's first independent, subscriber-driven digital news organization. Before founding Newslaundry, he worked as a producer, director, and writer in television and film projects, including Highway on My Plate, which he co-produced and directed, and the news satire show Gustaki Maaf. Over to you, Abhinandan, and take over the moderation of the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Arushi. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for making the time, and thank you, our panelists, for that slight delay, for being patient for 8 minutes. So I would just like to announce what we will be discussing. It's a data-led approach to India's agri-economy and its news coverage. There are several related questions to this that I'll be putting before the panel, and the panel consists of M.N. Parth, who is the principal correspondent with India Pen, and he's based in Mumbai. He's written for Al Jazeera, LA Times, Pari, and First Post. And the areas of focus are rural India and socio-political developments. And he has also won a Ramnath Goenka Award and the European Commission's Lorenzo Natali Media Prize. Welcome, Parth. Ajay Jhakhar, our second panelist, is a citrus farmer. He's based in a village called Mojgad in Punjab. He is a member of various cooperative societies and has actively participated in their activities. And he's also the chairman of the Bharat Krishak Samaj Farmers Forum in India, which was formed in 1995. It is a non-political and non-partisan association of farmers advocating for farmer prosperity. And today will be a busy day for him. So I believe he has to leave early. It is a day where farmers are agitating the country over 3 very important bills that passed yesterday. Thank you, Mr. Jhakhar, for making the time. I know it's a really hectic day for you. And Aparna Karthikeyan, our third panelist, is an independent journalist. She's authored 9 rupees an hour on the disappearing livelihoods of Tamil Nadu. She volunteers for Pari as well, which is an initiative by P. Sainath that many of you may be aware of. She has written for The Hindu, for The Caravan, for Wire, Scroll, Frontline, Open News Minute, and Seminar that covers pretty much every digital platform of any significance. She was a National Foundation fellow, and she produced a series on the vanishing livelihoods of rural Tamil Nadu. And Nidhi Jamwal is an environmental editor and head of the English desk of Gaon Connection that many of you may be aware of, is a platform for village voices. It was a physical, newspaper or magazine, and now I believe it's only digital. She has over 2 decades of experience in environmental and developmental journalism. Thank you all for joining us. And if I may, please start with Mr. Jhakhar, because I know, sir, you have to go soon. I have often been, part of discussions critiquing news media that why agriculture doesn't get. Can you hear me, Mr. Jhakhar? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Often that it doesn't get enough coverage, or it doesn't, have the kind of information that it should. My question is that I'm not sure whether it doesn't get enough coverage or it doesn't get the kind of coverage that it should get. What do you think is the problem in your view? Is it the amount of coverage or is it the kind of coverage?
So thank you for this opportunity. I think there is a difference in the kind of coverage and also the amount of coverage. If you were to look at the number of people and the livelihoods, then the portion that's available in the media as a percentage of the people involved with the profession, obviously agriculture hardly gets anything. But we also find there's a big difference in the vernacular dailies covering agriculture issues and the English media covering agriculture issues. You will see that most of the policy articles will come in the English media, and they will not be there in the vernacular dailies and Hindi media. They will not be talking about policy issues. They may be talking about real issues of what's happening on the ground. So there is that big difference that people who are writing on policy are basically writing in the English media, which is not being read by the local population by farmers themselves. So this is a big big gap I find in within my own organization also, and we find it generally. So not only are farmers not getting enough coverage, even the kind of coverage differs between vernacular dailies and English dailies.
Okay, let me just take this to Nidhi. You've been a reporter, and you now write for the Gaon Connection, which at least is supposed to represent the voices that don't necessarily find, or the kind of news that doesn't find its way in legacy media. Is it unique only to agriculture, or is this a malice generally, when it comes to reporting and the quality of reporting? I mean, are we treating agriculture as an outlier that it should be treated differently? Or in your experience, is everything skewed the way it's covered?
I think it is not just with agriculture, because I think when we look at journalism and when we look at reporting, it is very much in silos. Like, when I started my journalism career 20 years back with Down to Earth magazine, that time environment was seen as something, as a different kind of reporting arena, which only some journalists, possibly who are the worst, who can't do anything else in their journalism career, will become environment journalists. So that's how it so I would say same is with agriculture also. We look at it in silos where we don't understand there are intersections, which is why, Ajay just talked about, that only certain kind of stories will get published at certain platforms, and that also looks at it in a very, very, I would say, not a very broad perspective, where we think that agriculture, environment, politics, all these are interlinked. It's only now that we are actually understanding, when the farmers are out on the road protesting, we are understanding the politics also behind agriculture. So it's not just like, a farmer growing something somewhere and rainfall happens and he loses the crop and the story ends over there. So I think as journalists, we've also failed to see those, interlinkages in the last whatever decades. And it's only now possibly we are realizing that agriculture as a beat is beyond just looking at what an MSP is, or what a tuar dal cost of production is.
Okay, so clearly the session is going to talk about how open source data can better inform reportage. And I checked out the website, the India Data Portal, around the agriculture. And, this jibe has often been made at many journalists or people who are in the news profession, that you will not be able to tell bajra from rice, or, some such thing while you're talking about agriculture. At least in my case, as I tried to navigate myself through this really phenomenal website, and I highly recommend anyone who's following news, check it out. It's indiadataportal.com, and there are all these maps. You can create your own data visualization, and it's kind of zapping me a little, because I think on technology I'm a bit of an uncle, but it is very impressive. Have you, Aparna, have you checked it out? What does something like this do to make reportage better? While a jibe at an urban centric journalist maybe that you will not be able to tell bajra from maize or paddy, but does something like this make it more accessible to someone like me, who's clearly not a farmer? Does it add to that conversation, and does it add to my arsenal to report on agriculture in a more informed manner?
So having, written this book where I did try to bring in, human stories and data together, and kind of support the human stories with data, I can tell you that having the data in one place will be like a huge boon, because I was really struggling to get at some of the, information that you want. It is there in government policy papers. It is there in, annual reports of various departments of the government, and you have to go and download every single policy paper and scan that to find out, let's say, when I wanted details of how many native breed cows were there in every breeding station in Tamil Nadu. It was a task to get that data. It is a real task to get that data. So how do you use that to kind of supplement your story and make it more interesting, or make it more relevant to your reader, right? That's essentially what we're trying to do. How do you make what does data basically do when you're telling a human story? Is basically you're saying that this is not just one person's story, although you have to use a single person to draw attention to the story. Then you make it relevant by talking about it in a larger population. Like, one person's story in one village is reflected across the state, is reflected across the nation. And when it's, you throw in climate change, it is universal, right? So I think data basically helps to build the story, take it from a very small story in a very small location to a global story. It really can, depending on the story's complexity, of course, you can make it as big or small as you want. I think I did have a look at the website as well. It is very interesting. So some of the data that we want may not be available, really not available anywhere. It is in the villages, it is in the streets, it's in the, livelihoods that very small number of people practice. But I think all of it adds up to the agrarian class. When we talk about agriculture, are we talking about the 10% of people or less than 10% of people who are full-time cultivators? Are we talking about the 50% of people who have something to do with agriculture? So the agrarian class is very huge, right? It also consists of weavers, it consists of potters, carpenters, everybody who has something to do with the village economy. And as Nidhi said, there is a lot of interconnectedness there, which we sometimes fail to see. So how a good monsoon can influence the life of an instrument maker in a tiny village.
Okay, so can a data website like this, can it substitute for the lack of knowledge for, let's say, a very urban-centric reporters pool of just the understanding of agriculture, which right now is, pretty dismal, to be honest?
I think it can, if it is visualized in a correct way. So if you're going to look at, I'll give you one example. Okay, if you look at the drought year that we had in Tamil Nadu, 2016-17, I discovered in one little set of villages, 3,000 acres of paddy was grown the previous year. The year that there was a drought, 150 acres was grown. If I'm going to put that in a graph and put it out there and say that this happens in 8 villages, can you look at what has happened in the whole state of Tamil Nadu? Can you look at what happens in a drought year in all of India? That's going to be pretty powerful, right? That data will wake up people to the idea that, listen, we have a problem here. That can be very powerful.
Right. So, Parth, you work with India Spend, which specializes in actually data journalism, and I think you guys were the pioneers when it came to looking at data as a serious beat or a craft by itself in reportage. From your understanding, maybe you're, also well equipped to take on that question that I posed to Ajay. Is this unique, the quality of coverage to just agriculture and the lack of data, and kind of dissecting it as not treating it as one monolith? And what does lack of experience do vis-a-vis lack of data, and can one substitute for the other?
I think data is very important, but at the end of the day, I think there's no substitute to telling human interest stories. Data can supplement those stories, and I think even with the lack of data, I don't think it's an excuse. It can be an excuse for reporters to not cover agriculture because there's no data. And the intersectionality that Nidhi spoke about, I think that was one of the gaps that I saw while seeing most of the reportage around migrant workers as well, because very few people connected the migrant workers crisis to the agrarian economy that we are talking about. But because at the end of the day, the agrarian economy is what the migrant workers used to depend on, but can no longer rely on that. So they have to come to the cities and slog day in, day out. So I think that intersectionality is important. And as far as the quality of reportage is concerned, I just feel that the mainstream media doesn't cover it because it doesn't sell. It's not sexy enough to write on agriculture. It's just a very business-driven sort of a model that you see in mainstream media, that if a migrant worker or a farmer doesn't pick up our English language newspaper in the morning, why should we write about him or her? If the migrant worker or a farmer at 9 p.m. doesn't tune in to watch our shows, then why should we talk about that person? It's basically lack of apathy that drives the kind of coverage we see around agrarian economy, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, so what you're saying is data is not that necessary as far as just an interest is concerned. You can get that in other ways. Okay, I've just been told that Ajay can actually stay with us for the full hour. Great, thank you so much. Let me just hinge the next question to what is happening right now. 3 major bills were passed, and honestly, I'm still trying to figure out whether that's good or bad. Now, clearly, the politics behind the passage of these bills has got a fair amount of coverage, even though agriculture by itself may not. And of course, many news commentators have thrown a challenge to at least our broadcasters, that let's see whether Deepika Padukone's showing up at NC at the this narcotics control draws more cameras, or the farmers' agitation. So I haven't seen what's switched on television to see what works. Okay, let's come to this bill. We've put out an explainer on Newslaundry. I've seen Indian Express put out an explainer. Many people have put out explainers. When it comes to getting a regular news audience, which as Parth said, this doesn't seem sexy enough for news platforms to push it. How would you kind of explain the implications of these three bills? And since you are a non-political and non-partisan organization, to make it significant for a regular person to say, okay, this has my attention because it matters to my life, and not just that farmer who's agitating. You're the reporter, do your piece to camera. Why should we pay attention?
See, no newspapers are going to print for long stories which people want to read. I completely agree with Parth. They're going to report stories which which they think the readers are going to read. I'll just give you an example. I can't answer your question because I'm not trained for it, but I will tell you myths that newspapers and media are spreading very simply, right from the Prime Minister to editorials of 99% of news websites are saying that these bills allow farmers to sell their produce across the country after they have been passed. And that's the Prime Minister saying it, that's the Agriculture Minister saying it, that's the editors of financial dailies, of Financial Express, Live Mint, Indian Express, everyone's talking about it. But the law says, right from forget Mughal times, I think so, since Harappan times, Mughal times, British times, post-independence, there's never been a restriction on farmers to sell their produce anywhere in the country. But that's the biggest highlight that this that is shown in even in government advertisements as one of the things that this bill gets: freedom to farmers. Now, this has been put out differently by different farmer organizations, including by me and others, but no newspaper reports it. They still keep saying the same thing.
Why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think they don't have people like you writing that editorial on some, or an explainer on something? Like even during the budget, you'll always see the captains of industry telling us what's good, what's a good budget and a bad budget. You never have a representative of farmers.
Don't go to the budget. No captain of industry has the guts to say that the budget is third rate. No businesses, FICCI and CII and PhD Chamber of Commerce, they'll all come in the evening in the best suits and they'll say very good budget. And when they want to criticize it, they'll use the word very interesting and they could have thought about it or some stupid stuff like that. They don't have the guts. But see, the other problem with data is, I'm working with the Punjab government to advise them officially on agriculture policy is, and this is my experience not from Punjab but all states, is that governments don't want transparency. They do not collect data. When they collect data, it's not compatible with other departments. Forget with journalists and the public. The quality of data is very bad. It's not interportable to other departments. You cannot use it together. It's just not available. And it's a problem that starts, they don't even have e-documentation within their own departments. Forget transparency of data, So there is a requirement. They don't even have a market intelligence cell, to collect data. You have export ban on onions. On what basis do you have an export ban on onions? You've changed import price of masoor dal 4 times in the last 3 months. On what basis? There is no data on how much onions are produced or where it is stored. Coming back, I'm not answering your question, but I'm coming to a point of these 3 bills. So two of the bills talk about contract farming. They talk about Essential Commodities Act being diluted to such an extent that it could lead to hoarding. So one of the suggestions we gave to the ministry, to the Niti Aayog and to everyone was that whatever produce is there in the warehouses, they must report it to central government servers every evening. It requires a simple cell phone and it can be done. And we said it doesn't have to be exact. It can be, because it's an agriculture produce, you can allow a plus minus 5% leeway, but it gets reported to the government. All the industry opposed it. It never got incorporated into the acts or the rules, because if the government does not know how much onions are available, then
how can you take a decision on whether
they take a decision based on market and retail prices, right, which are after the markets have been manipulated. So I'm saying the government is not interested in collecting data which will give them which will allow them to make informed policy decisions.
I hope this website is a work in progress, and I hope it gets data from more and more primary sources as it grows, and I'm sure technology will allow it. Let me come back to Nidhi, and there's this lovely line which I don't know whether Avi or Rohini have come up with, that what skills are needed to do a data backstory, particularly on agriculture, and wait for this. What are the ways in which agriculture can be manipulated, and how can journalists sift the wheat from the chaff? That's a nice wordplay on what we're talking about. So I'm sure through Gaon Connection, if I understand correctly, your model does have your grassroots journalists, reporters, correspondents, who you, I guess, have to train because they aren't necessarily from journalism colleges. Not that means anything much, but nevertheless. So how can data help train them better or help them report better in your experience of having covered this?
Just, I think, 2-3 points. One more point I want to discuss is which you raised to Aparna also about this whole data thing. Now, I think we all think that once we have this data put out somewhere, journalists are so intelligent that they just look at it and they will start churning out stories. That's absolutely incorrect. I have been working with a lot of journalists, whether it is in Gaon Connection platform now and otherwise. A lot of journalists have no capacity to do stories based on data because we've never bothered to train them in data journalism. See, the whole point is that data can actually give you amazing stories, but you need to build capacities of journalists to be able to understand that data. So what generally happens is that you have these two different things. On one hand, you will have these biggies who are churning out data, putting it out on fancy websites. On the other hand, you have journalists who are like struggling. I'm like looking at this whole data and wondering, okay, now what is the story? At the end of the day, I need a story. I need to publish a story. So I think it is also very, very important for people who churn out these data to also train journalists in understanding that data and figuring out how do you narrate stories out of this data which you have. So I think that's one important point I really want to make, that we need to build capacities of journalists as far as data journalism is concerned if we want them to use data. Otherwise, it makes no sense. You can put out all kinds of data. Second point I want to make is which Parth said about, only things which are sexy, they sell, the stories. I think it's also failure on part of us as journalists because we fail to connect urban and rural India. You have journalists who work in Mumbai, so they will only report from Mumbai. They have absolutely no clue even where Latur is or, what tur dal looks like when it is growing in the field. And similarly, then you have journalists who are writing in vernacular, platforms. We've never bothered to work with them or to, even build their capacities. So which is where this disconnect comes. The only time we worry about tomatoes and, onion in Mumbai is when we say, oh, the price has reached 100 rupees a kg. And then we crib about it, see how it's become so much expensive, mehenga ho gaya and all that.
And then the one headline that everybody comes up with every year, which is the most unoriginal cliche: onions make government cry.
Yeah. Obviously. So I think it's really bad on our part that we fail to actually make urban India understand that their resources are coming from rural India, and unless you understand rural India, we are all jinxed. Another point that you said about community journalists is, when we are, in this whole parliament thing, when the questions were asked around, how many migrant workers died while walking or whatever, all the time government kept saying that we have no data. Later on, they started presenting some data. Sorry, I'm going very fast because I know we have a lack of time. But so what we tried doing is that sometimes when you don't have data, you need to create that data. So at our platform from Gaon Connection, we started doing these surveys, which we actually do face-to-face survey, which we did even during COVID, to understand what's the impact of COVID on rural India, whether it is on the health of pregnant women, whether it is on water sources, whether it is, on farmers, how many could sow, how many could harvest. So all of that. So somewhere I think it is also important for us to generate that kind of data from the ground, where I'm actually interviewing a farmer, spending an hour trying to understand, okay, what happened? What do you think about these things? As far as community journalists is concerned, yes, we do have a because we believe as a journalist, I can't be everywhere. I'm based in Mumbai, and you have stories everywhere in each corner of this country. So I cannot be traveling anywhere, or if we have 10 reporters in Gaon Connection, all of us can't be traveling everywhere. There's a cost to the organization also. And the good thing is that there are people already out there who have some skill sets. If you just train them a little bit and they understand their area, like if I go to Bengal, I can't speak Bengali, but a person who's already there knows the language and can actually connect so well with the people. So we do train community journalists, and we have a large network, and a lot of our stories actually come from these community journalists, which we have trained in Mojo mobile journalism also, so that you can just shoot and send us video clips also and write stories. So I think those are some of the ways we're trying to bridge this gap between reportage.
Aparna, I would like to come to you with the specific, because you've written for so many platforms, and you've also done video production and documentary. Like when I was starting Newslaundry, one device that is often used in screenwriting, which I kind of said in journalism also, you should have that. You should be able to describe your story in one line, like they teach you in cinema, that you should be able to describe your film in one line. Like Sholay is the story of a retired, Thakur police officer hiring two small-time thugs to murder a dacoit. That is the one-line story. And unless you know the one-line story, your story will be all over the place. So, as we just heard, that just having data is not enough. You have this whole bhaji, ab iska kya karu kya. So, what are the specifics that we can do to train journalists, to create the skills to cover journalism? What are the specifics that we can do?
So to me, my journalism training is all from P. Sainath. Okay, so he was literally my one man journalism school, and I think the biggest advice that he gives you is talking about the everyday lives of people and talking about processes and not events. To me, I think that has been the key learning. So we cover rural India when there is something very dramatic happening. Either hundreds of people are dying, God forbid. But the other thing is, like an IAS officer, somebody clears an IAS exam and the father happens to be a farmer or a auto rickshaw driver. You know what I mean? So either it's a complete success story, very unexpected, or it's a disaster, which is like, something which grabs eyeballs, right?
Both are events.
We leave out the events. Both are events. We leave out the everyday, the processes, what actually happens, what actually makes the country what it is, the livelihoods of everyday people. And those livelihoods are extremely complex. They're sophisticated. People have great skills, which are, completely undermined, underwritten, underpaid. Anything that a woman has done is, considered unskilled, not worthy of, equal pay with a man. So there are and caste, of course, is like a huge thing in India, right? So we have hierarchies which are there within society, and certain parts of that society is covered very well. So, for example, classical music is covered, folk music is not. This is something that, I've noticed. Like, so if they can be, this is something that people told me often when I was covering disappearing livelihoods, is that somebody will come, like what Nidhi said, somebody will go from a city to a village and then say, oh, your livelihood is dying. So let me write a story about a dying livelihood. And I say this as somebody who's done series on, disappearing livelihoods, but it is a trope. People want to talk about something very dramatic happening. It is not of interest to anybody to say that, listen, there is an all-night performance that happens even today in Tamil Nadu, where for 8 hours in the night, you have 6,000 people or 2,000 people sitting down and watching a performance. Play, which is a Terukuttu, like, Katekuttu, which is modeled on the Mahabharata. Nobody wants to hear that, because you don't want to hear that, this process is happening. You want to hear when there is one last person, there doing it. You want to hear the first woman doing it. I'm not saying it's wrong to present that story. I'm saying it's not enough to present that story. So when we are training journalists, we make them look at this center and make the everyday somehow relatable to every, other person. We should be invested in those stories, right? I mean, if everything that we consume is going to come from rural India, what are we in I'm not saying nothing happens in the cities, but primarily the foundation is laid in rural India. In the cities, we build on it, right? We're very good at that. So we are trained and equipped to do that. So when we are not relating to the people who do the major chunk of the work, I think we are failing. So 13% of farmland in India is owned by women. They do 70% of the agricultural work. Where are we talking about the stories of women farmers? Where are those stories? Why are we only talking about the 77% of the men who are owning the farmland, but only do 30% of the farm work? Why?
Right. I remember I heard a lecture by Sainath, I think almost 8, 10 years ago here in Delhi, where he said that when he had gone around Yavatmal, which I think is also where he's from actually originally, and he was,
Andhra.
okay, Andhra. So, but he said he spent a lot of time in Yavatmal and going to every individual police station, getting the FIRs who died by suicide. And many of the women are not considered farmers. So, the number that he came up with, he said, will not be actually, it'll still be a deflated number because many of those women aren't considered farmers at all, even though they do farming. So yes, Parth, a few years ago when Hans Rosling was his name, the guy who made Data Sexy with all that visualization. So, I mean, Hans Rosling, who made TED Talk School and who made Data Sexy, I remember, and that time we had just set up Newslaundry and everyone wanted data journalists because everyone thought they'd do this sexy data thing and how cool we'll be and everyone want to watch us. But then mobile became the go-to device. And now the general conventional wisdom is that this is too small to look at data. The stories is another. So how effective a tool is data, or is data a story in itself? Can we still do that? And is there any value in it?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you can also look at data from different perspectives, right? So, but I think data is often should be used to supplement as a supplementary tool to tell human interest stories. And as just to take Aparna's point forward, with when you speak about women farmers not included in the farm suicides, same happens with Adivasi and Dalit farmers as well, because they don't own farmlands either. When it comes to data and farm suicides data for between 1995 and 2015, you had 3 lakh farmers dying by suicide in India, and then the government just stopped releasing data of farm suicides. At the same time, in 2014 and 15, when to take your point forward of how we can shift wheat from the shaft.
Yes.
So
not my words, apparently they're Shubh Soni's words.
Yeah, so so basically in 2014 what they did was, because these numbers were exploding through the roof, what they did was they divided farmers into different categories: the tenant farmers, agricultural laborers, and then main cultivators. So you could spread those farm suicide data within those 3-4 columns to just downplay the number of farm suicides. So basically, I think data is important, but the way you look at it also matters. Now, someone has to go through these data sets and figure out that, look, agricultural laborers, tenant farmers, as well as main cultivators, they all come under farm suicides. Apart from that, you have students. A lot of cases have covered where especially girl students aged 15, 16 have committed suicide in rural areas because they know their parents are already in debt, and their marriage will include dowry and will further exacerbate the problem of debt, indebtedness of their parents. So they have committed suicide. Now that is also an outcome of the agrarian distress. Now these are the things that you can only pick up when you physically visit villages, meet people, spend an hour with them, have lunch with them, and then you can sort of come up with your own perspective, and then look at data from your perspective. Otherwise, if you don't have that perspective, you will just do stories based on the data that is presented to you, and I think that can be misleading in many cases.
Okay, Ajay, when it comes to what are the stories to be told, one like conventional wisdom that has gone around in reporting is that for a country to be significantly, richer or fight poverty, you have to get more people out of agriculture and into other, whether it's manufacturing or services or other industry. That is now almost considered the conventional wisdom. Is it the conventional wisdom? Is agriculture necessarily a loss-making venture and we have to get more people out of it? And if that is the case, then what are the stories that have to be told to make that case? And if that is not the case, why has this kind of canard gone around that this is the only way for a country to move forward? Is agriculture that bad?
So first of all, I want to say that, I'm feeling awed and, humbled that we have you here, and Nidhi, Aparna, and Parth, who are all data and journalists and media, and I'm the only odd man out here. And I'm feeling really, it's a great learning experience.
For us also, by the way. I mean, it's a great learning experience for us, from someone who understands farming at least better than I ever will.
I have always said that farmers will need to be supported in perpetuity. So the whole idea that farmers can get Atmanirbhar is wrong. And if we understand the fact that farmers can never become self-sufficient, they will always need to be supported. There are too many people on the farms. When people like me or other people say that we need to move farmers out of agriculture, then lots of other activists who are also in the farming sphere, they start criticizing. But the whole idea is that farming cannot support so many people as they are, because lands have got fragmented over thousands of years, and the land holding is too small to support people. So the question is, how do you best support them? How do you use your resources? Do you increase production? Do you got to start looking at agriculture not in silos of production subsidy or in terms of toilet making or in terms of something. You need to look at a totally different holistic synergy in the programs. Now the question is, when you talk about it, the problem that I face with journalists, and I've seen it happening, is that all journalists, if you do a press release, for example, if any government, every journalist wants a soft copy, because they just copy paste and they'll print it, because there's not enough money. They're like, there's not enough money in agriculture, journalism. There's not enough money in covering these rural livelihoods. But I really don't know, to tell you the truth, that how do you shift the narrative from what it is to what we want it to be. And the problem is, I think so, the story has to focus. We need to teach vernacular daily journalists, people in small towns, to understand policy and data. They need to understand. They don't, people in Delhi and reporting in English media or on social or on news websites like the ones represented here, they understand this policy idea, they understand data. But these ones who are reporting for local newspapers, let's say in Abor, coming out of my hometown, or smaller district headquarters, census town journalists, they don't understand that. They are focused more on immediate events that are happening. Canal mein pani band ho gaya, bijli nahi aayi, some tractor overturned. So there's such a huge gap that one idea will not work anything. I really think there is a scope for making smaller journalists understand the value of data, and making that data, and even to teach them on policy issues. If you look at, let's say, MS Swaminathan committee report, now you look at 99% of journalists, 99% of farmer organizations have not even seen that MS Swaminathan report. They've not read the whole report. All they do is they one quote, C2 plus 50 is what we want, and that ends it. Nobody wants to go into the depth. So we need to help people learn on this agriculture, covering rural livelihoods. Like you said, if you don't look in silos, you look at rural livelihoods. How do you teach them? It's something. How do you design like 1 week, 10-day refresher courses, and we find funding to do that?
Right. By the
I
way,
think it's a big challenge. I don't have any answers, unfortunately.
sure. No, that's okay. I mean, I don't think there are any simple answers to begin with. I mean, I hope getting the data is one way to at least start. I remember I'd heard this talk that, which was, and I've quoted this so many times that any other session I've done, people don't say, "Oh, see, story se bore karta," but I think it's very relevant. That which is the biggest which is the one innovation that reduced accidents when the automobile was invented at a very large scale and people were driving it around. And one would think it's a seat belt or the brake. It was actually the speedometer, because till the speedometer was invented, you didn't know how fast you were going. It was like your mother saying, "Be careful." Like, what does that mean? Below a 40 is careful, or above 60 is careful. So just getting a dashboard to see where you're going. Yes, go ahead, Ajay.
Just one more thing. And second thing I find is that economists and academicians who are funded, let's say, I don't want to name organizations here, who are funded by corporate houses, these academics, they torture the data. They flip the data around to make it so relevant. For example, today in Financial Express, there's an article by someone who I get mentored by, and I don't want to name him. He's proven by data that Bihar farmer incomes are much better than Punjab farmer incomes. Like, since morning I've been trying to grapple with the idea. So people,
maybe that's why I see so many turbans in Bihari fields.
So that's why they're coming for work to Punjab, but we are less than them. And and people who are good at articulating in English or good at languages also makes a difference in how you sell that data to the public. So it's just not the data; it's how people tend to do that, and it's happening more and more often.
No, well, yeah, but data is one step forward because it makes the invisible visible.
Yeah.
You have a dashboard, have a speedometer. Now, Aparna, if you could just comment on, are we, and often my grouse with much media commentary is that one treats it as a monolith, like also one treats agriculture as a monolith. I mean, I'm sure the Punjab farmer has unique problems as opposed to a farmer in Tamil Nadu or as opposed to farmers in, Bengal or Assam or further northeast. Is coverage also like that? I mean, I don't know, and if anybody from the panel, maybe Parth or Nidhi would have a better idea of that. But Aparna, is it that certain states or certain language reportage is doing a better job of reporting on agriculture, and we are just looking at this sliver of English media, which is not that large as far as numbers are concerned? I mean, would you be able to shed any light on that?
I think by and large, any reporting about, so I think this has come up in the panel, right? So what gets reported in local newspapers is something which is very close to the ground, which is very important and vital. What gets covered in the cities is somewhat like a bigger picture, right? So bridging the two is going to be the important part. In what language does it happen? So I follow a little bit of Tamil media, more of English media. And in English media, you find the stories that sell. You find these, event-based stories. There are some process-based stories. Pari, Gaon collection, all these people live in Kabar Lagalia. All these places do a lot of, I think, process-driven stories, long-term stories. Those are very important. It happens in, I'm sure, English and in other languages also. I don't know if language is the issue, but I think it's also very difficult sometimes to get to the story. It requires a lot of time, effort, money to chase these stories, because sometimes, just to get one, let's say a 5,000 word piece, or let's say a 10,000 word piece on, you spend 6 months in the field. Who's going to fund you, right? Where is the money for that kind of thing? Like, you have to keep going. So if I want to do a story about one village, agriculture in one village, I want to go back to that village over 3-4 years, because I want to know how it is during a drought year, when, there is a normal monsoon year. I want to know when they're, doing different crops before the harvest, after the harvest. I need to know it. How will I present a story? I can't do a 1-hour interview with somebody and then write a story about their lives. That's rubbish, right? I think the other way of looking at it is the model where you have enabling people to tell their own stories. In which case, people are talking about their own lived experience, whichever language it is. I'm sure translation is not the, a problem, because majority of Indians speak multiple languages. So we should be able to find very good translations. If we tell people, if we get people to talk about their lived experiences, they're going to get the sharpest and the best reportage. And as we know, media has a privilege, there is a problem of power and privilege and where it's vested, right? We don't have the diversity in media that we should be having, right? I think that will be the game changer. If we have the diversity in the media, if we have more voices outside of the people who are repeatedly telling these stories, I think the stories that we hear will dramatically change.
No, I absolutely.
And what
No, go ahead. Sorry,
Yeah.
carry on.
So I think that would be the game changer. I think diversity in media, who we are privileging as a reporter, as a journalist, who we are training, and all these gatekeepers, all of us in some ways, right? People with power, privilege, all of us have to, I think, step back, give the space over to the people who are actually experiencing these issues to come forward and tell the story. So what if the English is not up to scratch? We can remedy that very easily, right? Let them tell the stories in the language that they want to talk about, right? Let them speak those stories, let them do a video story. And I think, many websites are doing it, including Pari. And I speak about Pari because I'm, associated with Pari, and I know the kind of work that's going on there. But I know that there are multiple websites doing it. So that should be the way forward, I think. And that will change the narrative and what, it is so much more powerful when a farmer's son comes and tells you about the problems in farming than me, who's never touched a plow in my hand.
Right. So, in fact, we're doing at Newslaundry, we're doing a diversity audit of our own organization before we pay Gyan to others. So, and we're just trying to encourage others also to do this. But Nidhi and Parth, if you could just comment on the same question on is it this monolith, or are there some pockets that are doing a really good job because the market is there? Maybe some language newspapers. What have you found in your experiences of whether it's the data you provide to? I'm sure many other organizations take their data from India Spend, or Nidhi, with your Gaon connection. So and just to your Aparna, we tried to do a partnership with a volunteer-based news organization. Because they, for each day that they go out and report, they are foregoing a day's labor. So a 5,000 rupee kind of story thing. And what often happened, at least with us, while it didn't work out, and I don't know, maybe it's our fault, we should invest more in capacity building, is that a lived experience. Like if, I come and say that this SDM asked me for money and that person is corrupt, and this, just as a journalist, I have to say, dude, you can't just say that. You go there, ask him a question. We are told his office is like 15 kilometers away. I'll have to go ask my son to take me on the bike again, ask him a question. He may not answer, then come all the way back. Because journalism isn't just sitting in a panel and pillowing, which is what it seems to have become. And that didn't work out because they could not give that 2-3 days. They said, I'll tell you what my side of the story, but I can't give you a journalistic take. And a journalistic take is necessary at the end of the day, even if that SDM may be taking money, but you still have to give the guy a chance to respond.
Got it. I get the point, but my limited point is that, we don't have the space for this person telling their own story, right?
Oh, I agree. So I think a capacity building at that level is... Yeah. So
without the filter of you and me, that would be important.
Right. So, Parth, you want to come in, and then I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, sure. So when I report from Maharashtra, in the interiors of Maharashtra, a lot of reporters are doing terrific stories. They deserve to be told, and all of that's fine. But what I see, across the state is that they're extremely neglected. They're not paid well enough for them to go. So, for example, a reporter is based in Usmanabad. It's a town of Usmanabad, and there are like 7, 8 10 different talukas of Usmanabad. There's a story that's happening like 50, 60 kilometers away. A reporter with a Marathi newspaper in Usmanabad will get like 8,000 bucks a month. In that salary, how is he or she supposed to fill up his own petrol in his bike, drive down 50 kilometers, then come back and write the copy? So what's happening is the people who are actually on the ground and close to the farmland and farmers are not being looked after. And at the same time, the ones who want to sort of visit the hinterland from, say, Mumbai or Delhi, they're also working with websites that are kind of stretched for funds. So basically, what's happening, the landscape right now, media landscape in mainstream media, it looks like those who have the money are not interested in doing ground reporting, and those who want to do ground reporting are dependent on subscriptions or donations and so on and so forth. So that's I don't know how to reconcile with these two gaps, because at the same time, and secondly, those who are based in Usmanabad or Beed and towns like these, they are also under tremendous pressure because they are reporting against people, the strongmen in their own villages, and it's extremely difficult for them to do that. I can ask the questions to those strongmen that they can't, because I can come back to Bombay and I'm in my safe zone. If somebody's bumped off in Usmanabad, nobody gives a damn, right? So that's also something that we need to look at when we go forward and talk about rural reporting, because at the end of the day, people living in rural areas are doing far more work at far greater risk and at too less an amount of money.
Right. Yeah, Nidhi, Ajay, did you want to say something? I thought you...
No.
Okay, yeah, Nidhi, go ahead. Could you kind of give some clarity on these three issues that we raised?
Just 3-4 quick points I want to make. One about Ajay, that we generally think that all the data understanding is with English journalists. Trust me, we are equally bad. There are a lot of vernacular journalists who actually understand data very, very well. I mean, I know a lot of journalists who don't English, journalists who don't know the difference between acre and hectare. So I think that's we think that these 4 of us, me, Parth, and all sitting over here talking about data journalism, we understand data. We don't. A second point I want to make is that when we're talking of data and open data, there is a cost attached to data collection. That's what we figured now. If I have at Gaon Connection, we've done a survey in 23 states during COVID, a face-to-face survey where we have surveyors going and interviewing people in rural India. There is a cost attached to collecting that kind of data. And when you have no investor, when you have no advertisements, how do you remain independent? It's a big challenge. I think we all need to really think about it, that, we want open access data, but when you're collecting data from the field with hundreds of people attached, how do you keep it independent? Then this whole thing of which Parth said, that I completely agree with him, that people who are working in vernacular journalism, they are paid pittance. And in this COVID time, we've had people having 50% salary cut. Earlier, they would get scooter ka petrol. Now they're not even getting that. So doing stories for them, it is becoming increasingly difficult. But I think COVID is also a time we need to understand that Nidhi, Jamwal or Parth doesn't need to go everywhere to report on agriculture. Why are we not building capacities of people who are already there? Right now in COVID, we are missing out on so many important stories, because possibly I can't travel to a village in Bihar and report, or Parth can't travel to somewhere in Karnataka or somewhere else. I mean, he can, but I'm saying there are still some restrictions. So we need to build capacities of vernacular journalists, and they are actually very good. It's just that they need also some platform where they can put out their work. Because locally, like Parth said, there are a lot of influences under which they function. It's really not easy. So I think, and also very important for us is to have more media fellowships for vernacular journalists. We 5-7 just keep talking in echo chambers, these English journalists talking of these fancy, sexy stuff amongst ourselves. It is important for us to, break this silo also and get involved more with vernacular journalists and build their capacities, because we all got to work together. It's not just, a couple of English journalists just reporting once in a blue moon. They wake up and just start reporting on environment or agriculture or whatever. So I think I'll just end with that.
Okay, before I do the concluding points, anyone has anything that they wanted to say but weren't quite able to because of the paucity of time, or can I conclude? Yes, Aparna, go ahead.
So I think, I agree with Nidhi about the cost of collecting. So the state has to do it, right? The state has to be putting in the effort, the time, the money, and, actually doing it.
Good luck with
during
that.
the COVID time, I know. But I think we have to push for it, isn't it? So as wonderful as it is to have an independent data portal, we need the state also to come up and give us unmanipulated real-time data, which is genuine, which is believable. Because during the COVID time, even getting relief out to people, let's say like folk performers and all that in Tamil Nadu, we found that there was no we don't know how many folk performers there are in Tamil Nadu. So how many of them are below poverty level? We have no idea. So, people actually went from village to village trying to get this kind of information. When I was writing my book, I didn't know what is the livelihood of one village which makes Nadaswarams. I had to go from every house that was making it, and then we finally found out that the turnover of that industry is 19.6 lakhs. It's a very, rough idea. We roughly came out to find out that, in 2 villages of Tamil Nadu, they make 72,000 sickles. This is not my job to go, and I'm happy to do it. But my point is, the government should be having this data. I should be able to get it from the government, right? So, as we need independent portals, but we need government data as well.
Well, this data portal actually gets its data from official government figures. Like, for example, the map that I have tried to create, the Census 2011 demography of main agricultural labor is from the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Agricultural Census, Directorate of Economic and Statistic Department. So they actually pull real-time data from a lot of sources. I mean, I have some sort of an idea of how this works. So it's getting its data from, it is the most comprehensive data kind of one point right now. So, thanks, Parth, Ajay.
The government does not have that data.
Yeah, so what I'm saying but even they get it from there. They're not like, they don't have their own kind of censuses happening. They're getting it from other sources as well. So Nidhi, Aparna, Parth, Ajay, thank you so much. And To everyone watching, whether you are a journalist or training journalists, well, the one excuse you don't have anymore is that data nahi hai, kyunki indiandataportal.com has a lot of data, and it's a work in progress, and I guess it will keep increasing. And even if you just like to see maps colored in fancy multicolored, and that gives you a kick, you can also just mess around with that to see the data visualization bit. So thank you for watching. Thank you for your valuable time and your comments on this. I hope we have been able to get some sort of an idea going of what the problems are, and maybe a few solutions suggested too can be incorporated. So thank you. I hand back to you. I hope you use this portal to the maximum and also give inputs to make the amount of data it can process bigger and better and bigger and better. Thanks all.
Thank you so much, Abhinandan, for moderating such an amazing and interactive session. The amazing blend of journalists with a practitioner in this panel actually helped the audience to get a very diverse perspective. So thanks once again, and for talking about the India Data Portal also, thank you. Thanks, Ajay, Jhakhar, Parth, Nidhi, Aparna, for being a part of this panel and for all your wonderful perspective that you've brought out today.